Welcome to Belmont Manor. It's Doc Phineas, and we're the 82nd episode of Doc Talk. And today I want to address a very important subject. I've had so many interviews lately with people who are saying, what's happened to the steampunk movement? And it seems like everything is sort of the conventions aren't working anymore. And since COVID, the conventions have been a lot less, and people are not really affecting the attire and what's going on. And I think, like anything, steampunk is a wonderful genre. It'll be here forever, but it could be on a little bit of a change. And that change, I believe, is probably based upon, people, of course, are innovating and coming up with new ideas and new expressions in the steampunk movement. And our conventions aren't really going anywhere. They are just in a state. And for myself, I found a whole new meaning in a new movement that I basically have brought into fruition and founded, and that is the Victorian Bohemian Renaissance movement. Or we could call ourselves perhaps Victorian Bohemian Punks, or Victorian Bohemian Society. And the way that I came up with this particular nomenclature was that I found when I first went to India, there were many of the British stalwarts. Of course, England lost India in 1948. They gained their independence and they established their own country. But many of the British people who had gone there to live and who were in regiments and who had built beautiful homes, especially where I lived in Adyar at the Theosophical Society, and they had quite acclimated themselves to living in India, loved the lifestyle, loved the tropical splendor that is there. Where I lived at the Theosophical Society, it's 2,000 acres of just windswept banyan trees, beautiful palm trees, a jungle, gorgeous beach, and the Adyar River runs along the side of it. And Madame Blavatsky had filled that place with the most beautiful flora and fauna from around the world. So peacocks were walking around the lawns. We had elephants in a certain area that were living quite free. And we also had Kodo dragons, for instance, which were on the food chain. So I would run into Kodo dragons occasionally. And these very wonderful, eccentric Brits that were still living there had affected Indian attire, and it was their own sort of fusion between British clothing and also Indian clothing. I know my next door neighbor, Mrs. Leadbeater, decided that she wanted to move her Victorian bed from her bedroom in her stately mansion to the rooftop because she could get the evening breezes of the oceans coming through. And I literally watched her and her servants pull this massive mahogany British bed, completely draped with like maybe 50 yards of mosquito netting, all the way up, schlepping it up this staircase. And there was her bed on the rooftop of her house. And she would sort of in a stately way, go with all of her servants in the evening, following her, carrying a lantern, and go up this staircase where she would go to bed up there and in full view of everyone. And this long lavender sort of Indian smock, and her servants would sleep, all around her. They had these, blankets that they would sleep on, and she would sleep on the rooftop for more intensity. And occasionally, she would go there with her pet parrot and pet cockatoo, and she had pet monkeys. And that's the way these people lived. They literally went to another country and lived in elegant Victorian splendor. And even in the 1960s, when I was there, they were still very much Victorians, walking around in pith helmets and with all of the tropical attire. So I would say, where is the steampunk movement going? For me, I saw that firsthand, and I want to emulate that. And that's why I call this, the Victorian Bohemian. They were very bohemian Renaissance movement, or the Victorian Bohemian ethnic society. So I guess you could call us Victorian Bohemian Punks for short, if that makes you happy. I never was quite liking of the word punk, but I think it does describe us too in our music. So you can see, even from the outfit that I created, this is a fusion of ideas where I am literally wearing beautiful embroidered um, outfits that I have sort of mashed up and torn and re-sewn together to create a long smock, very much like what Colonel Leadbeater, Blavatsky, Annie Besant, all of these wonderful people who lived on this piece of property where I was at. And I actually lived in the Victorian mansion of Madame Blavatsky. I slept there at night. I was one of the few people allowed to reside there. I would play her massive organ, a pipe organ that she'd bought around the Cape of Good Hope, all the way from England to Madras, where she would play this massive organ at night and receive spirits. And even today, they have seances there and a lot of paranormal activities that all relates back to our time period from being steampunks. But I personally find it so interesting, so exotic to put an outfit together from that time period. Now, for my pants, I thought I might let you know that this is a 150-year-old silk sari from Kanchipuram that I sort of tore up, mashed up, re-sewed together, and created pants from the sari material. And I just absolutely love living in these, especially in a place like Las Vegas, where we're not really in England. We can't really wear the British clothing. When it comes to summertime here, it can be 110, 115 degrees. And so I made these wonderful outfits out of silks, and these are all silk saris, but actually sewed it into a pirate shirt. So I kind of believe the Victorian Bohemian punks, we're basically influenced very much by the Barbary Coast pirates. And whereas steampunks are more influenced, let's say, by the Time Machine, the Time Machine, the book The Time Machine, and also we're influenced by 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, I would say us Victorian Bohemian punks, we are much more influenced by Around the World in 80 Days, that by Jules Verne, and also Mysterious Island. I would say would be very much where we're taken from in our cosplay, and our sort of, there's other novels out there that talk about, the Brits and the Europeans in India, in Egypt, during this same time period, and how many of them turned native, or what they thought turned native, when they started wearing the beautiful silks and sari materials and all of the incredible embroideries. You can just see that amazing. This is all very, very heavy, heavy embroidery. And even my top part of this long smock that I'm wearing, dates back almost 100 years. They've had this sort of embroidery in India, very regal, very royal. And then, of course, the long jacket that almost touches the ankle. My belt, once again, was made in India. I was given this recently when I was at Jodhpur Palace with the Maharaja. And, the Maharaja and all of the Raj, the British Raj clothing fits into this time period so well. And he said, "Oh my God, I've got this belt. You must have it. It goes with your outfit perfectly." And it really does. It's solid beading from the Nath tribe of the Thar Desert. And then my necklaces that I'm wearing are more recent, but certainly done in an ancient style. This solid silver Om sign was a gift to me from Maharaja of Jaipur when I stayed there in a regal tent, in a royal Victorian tent recently. Maybe 100 peacocks outside around my tent. And just a few steps away from a vast lotus pond, just filled with pink lotuses that led up to a temple to Lord Shiva. I absolutely loved it, but in my style, I have to have something to wear, so I created a lot of this. And my other necklaces were presents to me from the lovely Iris Athel. So if Iris were alive today, she would definitely be a part of this movement. We talked about it all the time when we'd be in New York together, about the importance of Victorians who were traveling so much because they could travel in the 19th century. And especially in the early part of the 19th century, they could go to places like India, they could go to places like Africa. The sun never set on the British Empire, right? So, there were so many places that they could see, just as, Phileas Fogg in Around the World in 80 Days. He saw the entire world, and the concept of him going around the world in 80 days was unthinkable in those days. It was usually a voyage from India back to England, and that's just a straight voyage with no stops, would usually take around 3 months. So, it took time to go completely around the tip of Good Hope and to come all the way back up to the island of England. So, these people were world travelers. And in a time when you had to be on a ship for many, many days, Blavatsky said that those trips from New York City to England, from England to India, almost killed her. And many people did die, including some of the Hawaiian royalty when they came to her jubilee, passed away in that voyage, leaving Hawaii to such a cold place. You had to be very, very rigorous, and you had to, certainly have a certain aplomb for world travel. One of the things I think that's been a bit disparaging for us in the steampunk movement was that we never expected our movement to become popular. It was more of an inside movement. It was a subgenre of a subgenre. Most of us were geeks that were very literary, and our idea was that steampunks came through time travel to this time period in order to try to save it. So we had devices that we could actually, travel in, such as time machines, and come to this time period. And that's why our attire, our garb was somewhat eccentric, but we were an alternative reality. So in our world, in our books, in our novels, women are heroes, Black people are heroes, every ethnic group are heroes, Asians, gay people. We love and embrace everybody because we're a very enlightened organization and group of people. It is not a return to the oppression of the Victorian era or racism, slavery, women without the right to vote. We were an alternative reality. And then suddenly steampunk became mainstream, and it became the main costume that Spirit of Halloween was selling every year. They sold out steampunk before everything else. And it became plastic Nerf guns and, plastic goggles. And that was not who we were originally. We wanted nothing out of plastic. We wanted real, authentic fabrics from the time period. Our top hats were not made out of plastic or fake things. It was not Halloween costuming, but it was the real, actual garb. And when you go to France, you go to Italy, even the steampunks today are all wearing vintage things right back to the time period. They're absolute sticklers on that. And I think sort of the plasticity and the overexpression of the movement drove a lot of us away, and people entering the movement who did not understand the philosophy, had not read the books, did not really understand that time period, was a bit disparaging for a lot of folk. And I know for myself, I sort of backed away when I heard at steampunk conventions people making racist comments, or, saying that they wanted to go back to a time where women had no rights. I was done, because that's not who we were. We were an enlightened group of scientists who had come from that time period to try to help people in the current day. And so the Victorian Bohemian movement that I'm a part of now, we are very creative, very artistic people. We're very open-minded. And when you meet those people in India, the diehards that are still there, and you see them in their incredible clothes that they wear every day, and they're still having tiffin at 4 o'clock with pound cake. And I went to many high tiffins, and there would be Maharajas, there would be local Brahmins, and there would be every sort of Indian person at those tiffins, everybody together. They were very open-minded in their free expression, artistically and culturally and spiritually, of who they were. Most of them were very strongly paranormalists, and also many of them followed Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society and her teachings about the Mahatmas of Tibet, and her teachings about, many things that she taught about Lemuria and the history of India, and her tendency to look at seance and voices from the other side, the other realms, as a transmedium. She was bringing all of these things into the planet. The emblem of the Theosophical Society has the symbol of every world religion. So it's all of this together, very, very eclectic, very, very artistic, creative, culturally interesting people who exist at the Theosophical Society today. I absolutely love my home in Adyar. I would go back in an instant to live at Blavatsky Bungalow because I found it so absolutely exhilarating. And I found the company there to be so intelligent and wonderful to be around. Plus, with a smattering of Indian food, most of us love exotic foods. We love Indian, we love Thai, we love Afghanistani, we love Japanese. You know, we eat a wide palette of foods. I would also say philosophically influential in our movement is the writings of Sri Aurobindo Ghosh, who was the most prolific Indian writer during the time of the independence of India from Great Britain. And his side co-guru was the mother, who was Madame Ricard. She was a great spiritualist. She had studied with the great spiritualist Theon in France before coming to India. And she was the wife of the ambassador to French India, which is Pondicherry. And she once was immediately recognized by Sri Aurobindo Ghosh as being a living expression of the Divine Mother on our planet. And she absolutely made Pondicherry a princely, amazing, palatial place where there's beautiful walks and just all sorts of French accoutrements, but done in the Indian style. And maybe French India is even more beautiful than British India. If you go there, you'll see what I mean. There's incredible guest houses, and Pondicherry is just an amazing place to see with the influence of the mother. So her being French, her coming out of haute couture, coming from Paris, she immediately started taking the sari and making her own expression out of it, mixed with Chanel jewelry and her hair head in a turban. And you must Google pictures of the mother so that you can see her style. She is really a part of this movement of the Bohemian Victorian movement. She had it right down to a T, exactly the right expression in her style and clothing. Sri Aurobindo, formidable person, formidable in intellect, amazing guru. I'm so privileged to have been in the company of these people and to have had, some access to their philosophy, to their books. He wrote prolifically, perhaps more writing about the experience of enlightenment than any other Indian. And his poem, Savitri, is the longest poem in the English language, and just absolutely spectacular, expressing his entire philosophy in a poem. Pondicherry is really something to see. I would say Adyar, Pondicherry, and then, of course, living in Rajasthan with the Maharaja of Jodhpur, the Maharaja of Jaipur, Udaipur. These are the really great places of India that still contain the ancient culture, almost like it's the same as it was like thousands of years ago. And of course, we Victorian Bohemian punks, we graduate to these sort of areas to live around the world. I also think that many of us dwell in Morocco. I loved my experiences in Marrakesh with Princess Rabia El Galawa. She's the last living princess of Morocco. And just being at Telawet Palace, being there in the souk, and staying at Gough Palace, which is probably one of the most beautiful palaces in the world, was very, very highly influential over my style. And my style didn't just stop here with my garb, but as you know, it's my entire style. It's the way that I live here at Balmont Manor as an expression of Bohemian punk. Everything at the manor has this strong Victorian feeling of eclecticism. And Iris Apfel told me, she said, when I come in your house, it's an expression of my insides on the outside. She absolutely loved everything that I was doing because, as she said, you believe like me, more is more, not less is more, but more is more. And I was so taken by Ren fairs in my life. I was one of the first persons to establish the Ren Fair with Isaac Bonewitz in the San Francisco Bay Area when we had it in Mill Valley, and we would actually go to Ren Fair on horseback. So my idea was to tent every single room in my house so that it looked like a Ren Fair tent. And the sort of ways and appointments that I did was very much like the sort of dressing that we do in a Ren Fair tent when you go there, except mine's way over the top. Mine's much, much more what you would see, at a Renaissance fair. There's no way you could schlep all this stuff there. But I wanted to live in that feeling of the Renaissance every single day of my life. I love Ren Fair so much. So I'm very, very highly influenced by Ren Fair, Renaissance Fair. And I live in a renaissance of ideas. Renaissance means awakening, the awakened ones. So this is when basically the Renaissance, Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo and all these people awakened and created some of the most beautiful artwork in the world, like Caravaggio, Michelangelo, Lorenzo Medea. All of these people were painting and bringing, just a new concept, a new way of art to the planet. And so I wanted my home to reflect this idea of Victorian Bohemian sort of ethnicism and anachronism, where it is anachronistic. There are many elements from around the world, from different time periods, and I am a time traveler, so I consider myself as someone who would be privy to all these elements because I am constantly traveling in time. But I would say that aging for my movement to take Victorian Bohemian punks and to become that, have our own conventions, our own literature, our own bands. And we actually have a band here in town that is expressing what I'm feeling about this new movement. And I think in a time of that we're living in a political turmoil and chaos, at least in the United States, there's just complete chaos right now at the highest levels of government. And this is going to be something that will protect you from the toxicity, is to remain artistic, to keep creating like I do every single day. I'm creating things, I'm creating garb, I'm creating all the elements of the expression of this particular time period that I'm looking at. And I think our time period is actually a little bit pre-Victorian as well, because really you could look back to the 1750s and find these people who had gone off to India and to the colonies and really gone native. Once they got to the colonies, they really changed their style and started affecting native garb. I think really that's probably the beginning of the prototype of the movement, and certainly under Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria herself was a Victorian Bohemian because she was very, very taken by Abdul. And when Abdul came from India, he was bringing a coin that had been struck off in Queen Victoria's honor. And he brought that coin, a mohol, to present to her during her jubilee. And so, they basically took him from his job. She was so taken by his stately and princely manners and by his love and devotion to the Empress of India that she started affecting Indian attire and ordering fabrics from India, which he helped her construct some of her garments. He brought in carpeting from India for her. And of course, they built, the rebuilt the peacock throne at her incredible insistence, and a room with paintings of the various princely states of the Raj. And she truly became Empress of India at that time, where she had a peacock throne to sit in, and she'd learned to speak and write Urdu, which is a very difficult language, but she's definitely with us, a Victorian that was so influenced by the presence of the jewel in the crown, which was India, that they changed their whole attire and affected a whole new way of beading, where they started learning Urdu. For myself, I went to India, I learned Sanskrit, I learned to speak, read, and write Tamil and Hindi. And I also, am conversant in Sinhalese, Malayalam, Telugu, and Kannada. So I also learned a lot of languages, and I had to learn this because I was working with a lot of royalty, and it was the royalty that was sponsoring me to India, to various archaeological digs, and also to look at the things that they had collected to establish provenance, just like I do today in this time period on Pawn Stars on the History Channel. I was giving provenance way back 40 years ago to these people, telling them what they had, what was collectible, what they should keep, what they should get rid of. So it's the start of a new world and a new day and a new movement. And I hope that those of you who are inclined to want to join or follow me, you're very, very welcome to become Victorian Bohemian Punks or the Victorian Bohemian Ethnic Society. And you're very, very welcome to join me, to follow me, to affect the attire. And I'm going to see if I can't start producing some fabulous events here in Las Vegas where we get to wear our garb, we listen to our bands, our music, and of course, our perspective on what is absolutely fabulous in our world today. So thank you for joining me here today on Doc Talk. And come one, come all, join me in the Victorian Bohemian Renaissance experience. Namaste and good day.